At a time when many religions face skepticism, our next guest says all is not lost, and that the path to Christianity's rebirth could be very green. Here now to tell us how he believes environmentalism could breathe new life into Christianity, Stephen Bede Scharper. He is co-author of For Earth's Sake, Toward a Compassionate Ecology. He's also professor at the School of the Environment at the University of Toronto, and we confess a frequent visitor to these parts. Nice to have you back here again.
Nice to be here, Steve.
I want to take you back to that day, not that long ago, when no doubt you were watching on television, when Cardinal Jorge Mario Bergoglio came out onto the balcony. Habemus Papam. What'd you think?
Well, I loved his simplicity. Buonasera. It was just such an open and pastoral welcome. It wasn't imperial, it was very personal. I also liked the fact that he was speaking to the people of Rome as their new bishop, first and foremost. Later, he spoke to the entire church. But it spoke of his pastoral sensitivity, because he is actually their bishop, first and foremost, and then the bishop of Rome and the descendant of Peter. But he connected immediately with the people of Rome. And it was in such a gentle, open, and non-authoritarian way. And for me, that was very refreshing.
I thought of you at that moment because knowing your interest in the environmental angles of religiosity, his first big decision was choosing the name Francis. And St. Francis of Assisi, I gather, was the patron saint of ecologists.
Absolutely.
And there you are. So was that a big deal for you?
It was. And at first I wasn't sure if it were Francis Xavier or Francis of Assisi. Francis Xavier, of course, is the founder of the Jesuit order, and he is the first Jesuit pope, as you know. But it seemed clear as time went on that Francis of Assisi was his namesake. And what an inspired choice for this time in history. In 1967, a man named Lynn White Jr. wrote a very controversial article, The Historical Roots of Our Ecologic Crisis. In that article, Lynn White, a cultural historian, claimed that the Catholic Church and the Christian Church in general was the most anthropocentric religion in the world, most human-centered,
yes.
In a sense, ignoring other parts of creation. As a result, he claimed there had been a murder, not a homicide, but a geocide, a biocide, and the smoking guns lay in the churches and synagogues of Western Europe and the Western world. And he said, as an antidote, St. Francis of Assisi should be held up as the patron saint of ecologists. And lo and behold, when John Paul II ascended to the seat of Peter, he named Francis the patron saint of ecologists. And now we have the first pope to name himself after St. Francis. This is very encouraging.
It's all heading in the right direction for you.
In that respect,
Yeah.
yes. And part of the reason Francis is so important as a figure, St. Francis, is not only his humility and his concern for the poor. The church has been able to adopt that, has been able to follow that and emulate it. But his connection with non-human nature has put him often at the outskirts of theological conversation. I mean, this is a man who gave sermons to birds, who talked to Brother Wolf about not attacking livestock in Assisi, who spoke of creation in terms of kinship, brother sun, sister moon, reflecting the traditions of many Aboriginal peoples today, still. This kind of put him somewhere between Sleepy, Dopey, and Doc in terms of the pantheon of Christian saints, and that's a quote from David
remember
Tracy.
those disciples exactly, but okay. Keep going.
Absolutely, in terms of the kind of outliers of Christian saints. The fact that the Pope has named himself after Francis brings him right to the mainstream.
Well, let's play a clip from his inaugural homily. We have a translation here from a woman actually who was in that chair a few weeks ago, Alicia Ambrosio, who has her own program on Salt and Light Television. And, well, let's play the clip, and then we'll get a question coming out of it. Roll tape, please.
I would like to ask all of those who have positions of responsibility in economic, political, and social life, and all men and women of goodwill, let us be protectors of creation, protectors of God's plan inscribed in nature, protectors of one another and of the environment. Let us not allow omens of destruction and death to accompany the path of this world.
That is about as green a homily as I've ever heard any pope ever given. You want to take issue with me on that?
No, I would concur. And one thing that's interesting is the use of the term protector. Just as a sidebar, it's interesting. I have a former student, Joanna Defoe, who's now at Yale studying environmental studies. She sent me that exact passage, and she sent it out to other friends saying, my goodness, something akin to what you just said. Isn't this amazing that the Pope is talking about protecting the environment as well as protecting the poor? And so he's making this combination and this connection, which is so vital. Also, this is an interesting use of protector in Catholic social teaching. The previous Pope, Benedict, did talk about protecting human life from womb to tomb, in other words, from conception to natural death. And in Catholic social teaching, you hear about protection of the rights of workers and protection of the right to strike, etc. But less accented, and perhaps this is unprecedented, I couldn't dare say, not being a historical scholar of the church, but this seems to be a unique use of the term protector in terms of linking creation and the poor under the term protector. We've heard the term stewards, we've heard the term faithful followers and supporters, but the term protector in terms of creation is fascinating.
You think it goes further?
I do. And also, earlier in this particular homily, Pope Francis talks about this is a human quest, not just a Christian or Catholic quest. As humans, we are to be protectors of creation. And he speaks to all people of goodwill, not just people within the tribe, so to speak. Again, echoing the documents that came after Vatican II and some of the papal statements from Pope Paul VI, who spoke to all people of goodwill, not just Catholics.
Okay, I get how a papal focus on the environment helps the environment. How does it help Christianity?
It can help Christianity in a variety of ways. One is, this is one of the most important issues we face today. With climate change and rapid species extinction, we are in a huge moment of transition. In fact, according to David Orr of Oberlin College, an environmental studies scholar, we're losing between 40 and 140 species per day. I'd like to say, if the Catholic Church or the Christian community as a whole were to get a report card from the Creator on their protection or stewardship of creation, I don't think the grade would be very high.
We'd be flunking.
And I think, and I think in the comment section, we read something like, does not play well with other species. This is a critical moment for the integrity of Christians to take the call to protect the earth seriously. It can be revitalizing for the church itself. Also in terms of evangelization, in terms of outreach to young people. I used to teach at the University of Notre Dame in the United States, and there was a ministry not far from South Bend, Indiana, run by a group of Roman Catholic sisters. It was called Earthworks. They had a community-supported agriculture project. They took in animals who had been abused and gave them shelter and a life in their community. And I'd take my students down, and you'd see these Notre Dame students, football players among them, shoveling horse manure, taking care of the animals, and they would be amazed at these nuns. They had never met nuns who were farmers. They had never met nuns who shared their concern for the earth. And many of them who were going through their own questioning of the Catholic faith, which is natural at that age of life, felt a renewed interest in their faith because they were meeting people like Sister Janice Weigel, and they were reading theologians such as Thomas Berry and others, for whom the environment was not ancillary, but essential to their lifeway as Christians.
Barry was talking about it, what, 50 years ago?
Absolutely.
So, yeah, a long time ago. Well, let's see how far we want to push this. Does this mean that the environment has become so sacred that if you pollute the environment, it is the equivalent of a mortal sin now?
Well, that's interesting. And I think Pope Benedict has helped the church move forward in this because he began to talk about moral commandments around creation, around the earth. He began to explicitly develop Catholic moral teaching around the earth. So you can sin when you abuse the environment. And this could be something that comes up at the confessional. Yes, I stepped on my cat's tail and maybe I tattletaled and maybe I poured motor oil down a drain. And that is a sin in this kind of emerging understanding. So this notion of ecological sin accompanies personal and social sin now as part of a panoply of concerns for the Catholic Church.
I don't mean to be facetious about this, but how many Hail Marys do you think you'd have to say in order to be in the good books if you poured motor oil down a drain?
Well, having never heard confession officially, I wouldn't hazard a guess.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. Here's an excerpt from the book. Let's read this. We have been aware of serious environmental problems for decades, and yet the engagement of religious traditions with these issues has been tardy and tentative. There are promising developments here and there, but these are offset by signs of indifference and outright hostility toward environmental concerns. Given the urgency of the challenge and given the lack of unity of purpose within and among mythic traditions, there can be little hope that they will make a meaningful difference. That by Loyal Rue, Religion is Not About God. That's not your book, that's another book that speaks to the same issue. But I wonder if you'd respond to the thoughts in there.
Absolutely. For many scientists, policy experts, and environmentalists, the religions of the world are now one of the last great hopes for the environmental movement. In 1990, a group of 32 world-renowned scientists wrote an open letter to the religious communities of North America. This was signed by famous scientists such as Carl Sagan, Stephen Jay Gould of Harvard, etc. Some of them were Nobel Prize winners. In that letter, they said, "We see the environmental destruction as a major warning light on our collective dashboard. We need you to take this seriously. We present our scientific data to policymakers, politicians, etc. They might even write elegant legislation, like in Mexico, but consistently it's ignored. We understand that we have to change values as well as policy, that this has to be a change of heart as well as legislation, and that's your job. And we're asking you as religious leaders who speak to the moral sensibilities of the world to take this seriously." As a result of that, the National Religious Partnership for the Environment was established in the United States. There have been so many outgrowths as a result of that. There's the Forum on Religion and Ecology based at Yale University. Mary Evelyn Tucker and John Grimm head that up. They helped spearhead 10 volumes from Harvard University Press, a 3.5-year process of scholars from religions all over the world, Jainism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, meeting with policymakers, scientists to come up with these 10 volumes on the intersection of religion and social change. And if you go to their website, it's fascinating, Forum on Religion and Ecology, you can find out what engaged Buddhists are doing in Thailand, wrapping saffron sashes around trees to protect watersheds. You can see what the Jewish redwood rabbis are doing in Northern California.
The redwood
rabbis to save sequoias and other redwood forests, negotiating deals with governments and paper and pulp companies. All over the world, religious groups are making a huge difference now. Again, it may not be mainstreamed, but the ferment is there.
How about Catholics? Are they at the vanguard of environmental theology?
In some ways, yes. And people like Sister Miriam Therese McGillis of Genesis Farm in Pennsylvania has a whole community-supported agriculture project, as well as an outreach to help protect local farms, and also reflection and spiritual training on the works of Thomas Berry, people like Brian Swim, who bring this environmental question into a cosmological context.
Okay, but my hunch is that if people think about the panoply of Christian churches and which are at the vanguard of the environmental movement, Catholicism doesn't come first to mind. Might be some United Church, Unitarian Church, whatever, but it's not Catholic Church. You got a sales job to do here?
Well, I think there is a problem and a disconnect between some of the leadership and some of the membership. And many people in the Catholic Church are doing remarkable things, but they're not necessarily in positions of what people see as power, cardinals, bishops, etc. However, out west, in the tar sands, there was a bishop, Bishop Bouchard, who wrote a very powerful statement on the moral complexity and the moral wrongness, quote unquote, of the tar sands. This was a leadership position that many others had not taken. And so in certain areas, you do see so-called leaders of the Catholic Church making important stands. And this is something that Vatican II helped the Church understand. The Church is not just cardinals and bishops. It's the entire faithful. So Sister Miriam Therese McGillis or Father Jim Profiting Guelph, who runs the Jesuit Ecology Project and does amazing work as well, are part of that ferment. They're part of the leadership of the Church.
Well, let me push back on this a bit, because some would argue that the biggest problem that the world has right now when it comes to the environment is the fact that there are just too damn many of us, right? We have a world of 7 billion people. It's not getting smaller. It's not going to get smaller. And the church tells people, you know, be fruitful and multiply. Get out there and make the population even bigger. Is that an inconsistency?
It can be. What Catholic theologians will often cite, and other Christian theologians, in terms of the population question, which is indeed important, is that you have to look at consumption as well as population. So there have been estimates to say that a child born in the United States or Canada consumes 300 times more resources than a child born in Ethiopia.
We are energy
or
hogs,
India.
there's no doubt about it.
And consumer hogs in many ways. So population has to be looked at in terms of consumption. Secondly, Bill McKibben, a leading US environmentalist, in answering questions such as this, said, well, actually demographic trends show there might be a leveling off at about 10 billion, in the sense that it's not unbridled growth. Thirdly, we see that whenever women are educated in terms of health, education, and reproductive rights, population goes down. So education and justice issues for women are key to this as well.
No argument there, but there's lots of people out there who want to make sure that doesn't happen.
And what's interesting, when you talk to many priests in nations of the South and even here, they talk about what happens on the ground. There's official Catholic teaching, and then there's the people actually helping women and others deal with these issues. And one thing that was very important after Humanae Vitae in 1968, when the Church was saying that artificial birth control is a problem for Catholic social teaching, the Catholic bishops in Canada came out with their own statement and said if people prayerfully and thoughtfully reflected on Humanae Vitae and still decided because of their conscience to use artificial birth control, they were still Catholics in good standing. In other words, the personal conscience, as long as it's educated and prayerful, is something that's sacrosanct. So you have Christian theologians around the world who've been advocating smaller families as a voluntary witness to the consumption and population patterns.
I'm just curious, did you see the George Weigel interview I just did before you came out here?
I saw parts of it,
You saw
yes.
part of it, okay. Well, you know, he is making a forceful argument as a Catholic intellectual for an evangelical Catholicism. What do you think of that?
Well, first of all, I celebrate George's passion and his freedom to speak as a Catholic intellectual. I think that's extraordinary, and it's a wonderful contribution. I wish that others are allowed to speak as well. And part of what we've noticed in the last two pontificates is a kind of, I would argue, a fortress-like understanding of the Church emerge. After the opening of the windows of John the 23rd and Vatican II, where John the 23rd said, we have to open the windows of the Church to the modern world, I've had a sense that, especially during Pope Benedict's reign, there's been a different metaphor at play. It's almost like closing the windows, drawing the curtains, and relying on an internal air filtration system to get out the bad air. A problem with that is when you open the windows, you not only get fresh air, you sometimes get bad smells. You get sounds from the street. You get different voices yelling. You get a different reality because you're open to the world.
You're okay with that?
I'm okay with that, and Vatican II was okay with that. This is important because the Spirit is not, the Holy Spirit in Catholic teaching or Christian teaching is not enclosed within one community. It's at work in the world.
No, fair enough, but I shouldn't speak for George, but I think I'm right in characterizing the way he put it as, not everything's up for debate in this church. You know, there are lots of things that we can debate, but there are some things that I'm sorry are just not debatable, and if you want to be a Catholic, you've got to sign on to that, right?
Yeah, that's right. There are certain basic understandings. However, everyone is worthy of respect within the debate. And it's an attitudinal shift toward love, compassion, and openness to hearing diversity. When people are made to feel somehow less than human or not part of the community when they're expressing themselves, that's a problem.
You think the church has done that?
I think it has. Since John Paul II's time as Pope, from now, over 100 theologians, bishops, women religious, priests have been investigated, silenced, and or censured. There has been a kind of what I call a closing of the Catholic mind. And this has residual effects. because people then become gun-shy, as it were, to express ideas. I've talked to theologians at Notre Dame, where I used to teach in the United States, and they say, the plug has basically been pulled on sexual ethics in the Catholic Church because people are afraid. That's been confirmed by Toronto theologians I've talked to.
You think this is a direct result of Benedict's papacy?
It's a direct result of, even before that, of Pope Benedict, when he was Cardinal Ratzinger, as head of the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, going after people like Father Charles Curran and others who were exploring sexual ethics. It doesn't mean that they do not have a right to explore these things or to question them. That's for sure. But part of it is, how are they treated? How are they brought into dialogue? How are they corrected, etc.? And sometimes it's been, I think, much more heavy-handed than a Christian charity response would allow.
Okay. I'm going to read an excerpt of something now. You can look in the monitors here in the studio to read along with me as we talk about the extent of the Catholic Church's problems today. Let's go overseas. Recent surveys show Catholics in the Republic of Ireland are deserting their faith faster than believers in almost any other nation worldwide. Statistics are one way to tell the story. In 1984, 87% of Irish Catholics went to weekly Mass. In 2011, Archbishop Dermot Martin said 18% of Dublin church members attend services. Images are another option. Gaggles of green bedecked youngsters and young adults line the St. Paddy's Day parade route, but in Dublin's cathedral, youthful faces only speckle the crowd. Does this, at the risk of torturing a metaphor here, sound like the church needs more than just a fresh coat of green?
Absolutely. And in terms of dealing honestly with the sex offenders and the sex abuse scandal and the rape of children within the church, you can see some of the direct results of that in Ireland. But we can also look to Quebec in the early 1960s and see a similar phenomenon.
You want a quiet revolution.
Well, this occurred. Not that I wanted, but it happened. And it became a very important teaching moment. There's a wonderful Protestant theologian, Canadian, Douglas John Hall, who taught at McGill for years. And he used to say, the bishops in Quebec, after the Quiet Revolution, wrote some very powerful, humble statements. After their power and prestige had evaporated and their churches emptied. They said, what is this telling us about our arrogance and our hubris and our pride in an earlier period? What is the Spirit telling us now about how we have to be present to Quebec society? We've had to learn through, in a sense, desertion and humiliation, what it means really to be a Christian community. And so this is a soul-searching time for the Irish church, but it's also for the larger church. And they have to take seriously and reflect very fundamentally on what has happened with this abuse scandal. And if you're in a protector mode, a fortress church mentality, if you're in a mode that closes doors and windows and tries to vacate the problems, you may not be as self-critical and truthful. And you protect members of the church who were committing crimes such as sex abuse, rather than bring this out in the open.
Okay, but let's look beyond the sex abuse scandal. This is a church that is facing dwindling numbers in much of the world today. And we heard George Weigel say, you can't make it easier to be a Catholic because that kind of progressive brand, if I can put it that way, of Catholicism is dying out. That's not where the growth is happening. Do you agree with that?
After Vatican II, you had an explosion of young people in liberation theology movements, based communities in Brazil and elsewhere in Latin America, social justice, development and peace groups around the world, Youth Corps here in Toronto, an explosion. This wasn't easy. Literally thousands of Catholics and Christians were killed for their commitments. Over 10,000 in El Salvador, it's estimated, of lay catechists were killed during the 1980s. And recently we just marked Oscar Romero's death on the 24th of March, a martyr for taking the side of the poor. This was not an easy, convenient choice. People were politically and ecclesiastically assaulted for taking on the option for the poor. In 1971, the World Synod of Bishops, in their Justice in the World statement, said, "It seems to us that action on behalf of justice is a constitutive dimension of the preaching of the gospel, not ancillary." This is not an easy, progressive moment.
When I say easy, I don't think he was referring to that, obviously. I think he was referring to, we can't loosen up on celibate, male-only priests. We can't loosen up on sexual mores, that kind of thing?
What I think we can do is widen the tent poles and change the atmosphere of dialogue. We have to listen to people. We can't just dictate. It's almost like the church is the answer. What's the question? It's what are your questions? What are you bringing to this time? And how is the Spirit at work in this wider community? And if I may, Steve, I just wanted to quote something from a new book by Bishop Remy Deroux, Chronicles of a Vatican II Bishop. Bishop Deroux was one of the Council Fathers, and I was just with him at a conference in Saskatoon, and it was beautiful to hear him talk about the environment at the Council. And there's something here that he wrote that I think is worth sharing. He writes, "We do not bring religion to non-Catholic or pagan lands, but rather we recognize that the divine is at work throughout the universe and beyond the visible boundaries of the Church. In the central mystery of the Word incarnate, we appreciate the beauty and power of truth wherever it is found. It is no longer a question of we are right and everyone else is wrong, but of being partners in the search, with each of us sharing fully and generously the substance of what we have received through the Holy Spirit." So this is a church very much in need of the larger world. This is why it's encouraging that Francis, in his opening homily as Pope, speaks to all people of goodwill.
As you were reading that quote, I was looking for the one in your book which said, throw the Bible out, look at nature for 20 years.
That's from Thomas Berry.
Thomas Berry, right.
He said that we've done the Bible very well. I mean, we've really looked at the Bible. It's an important and necessary source of revelation. But we need to learn to listen to non-human nature, the voices of nature. So we should put the Bible on the shelf for 20 years, he said, and learn to listen to nature. Because there are two sources of revelation in his understanding. Obviously, Scripture, but what gives rise to Scripture? Creation itself.
I have to listen to the control room because they're telling me we're out of time. Stephen Bede Scharper, for Earth's sake towards a compassionate ecology. Good of you to come into TVO tonight and share your views with us. Thanks so much.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, Steve.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.